Every 2 months or so, like clockwork, someone in the gaming industry will say that games need to get away from violence and fun and focus more on thoughtful, relevant, more emotionally engaging, more intellectually stimulating ideas. And they'll discuss the need for a Citizen Kane of video games. They'll talk about how games need to tackle more mature subject matter rather than just chainsaws and guns. And without fail, the response by the commenters and the gamers and of the world is always the same, at least on the internet. A small group vigorously nods their heads while looking down their noses at the other group of gamers who says that games shouldn't be serious. Games shouldn't be any one thing, and anybody who says that is a pretentious asshole. And then they turn around and they say, well, games should be fun. We grew up on games as fun. They should be fun. That's what they're about. I've read comments from a fair amount of people who actually think that if really serious, really sort of navel-gazing games ever became popular, then the fun games that we all grew up on, the arcade games, the violent games, the action games, would actually sort of fall by the wayside. And they get very, very protective, and they get very, very scared at the idea that one day, games like God of War would actually become extinct. And I want to say two things about that frame of mind. One, that anybody who legitimately thinks that games like Gears of War or God of War or any Gut of War is actually going to be outnumbered in the future by games like Passage or Flower or Braid needs to seriously rethink how illogical and silly that actual fear is when you consider how profitable games like Gears of War are. And two, nobody is saying that all games should be very serious and very moody and very pretentious and navel-gazing. What they are saying, or at least what I'm saying, is that right now about 95% of the video games in the world are juvenile, stupid, pointless, completely irrelevant, macho male power fantasy that has absolutely nothing to say about the human condition, that has absolutely no artistic relevance, and can pretty much just be summed up as mindless entertainment and diversion that will never really affect anyone for any length of time, intellectually or emotionally, or in any way that really matters in the way that art is supposed to. And that if games don't branch out, if games don't begin tackling bigger issues or begin thinking about different ways for the player to interact other than killing things or leveling up, then that's what games are always going to be. The hope that games become more serious and more relevant is not some sort of quest to take away all the fun from video games and turn everyone into like emo little bitches who just sit in the corner and hold their knees and then try to wonder what the metaphors are in Braid and whether or not they've got it right. That's not the attempt. The attempt is to make sure that games can be more than one thing. If you think about any other artistic medium that's actually respected as a legitimate artistic medium, can you imagine any of those being reduced to just one emotion or just one theme or idea repeated over and over? What if every single movie you watched had to be a romantic comedy? Period. It couldn't evoke any other emotions except possibly incidentally, other than, ooh, I want to see them kiss, and ooh, that's kind of funny in a weird flirtatious way. What if every single book you read was some sort of horror novel? Basically, that's the kind of thing that we get repulsed by if you think about a medium that's established as an artistic medium having to reduce itself to one idea. But the second someone suggests the opposite with games, that maybe we should branch out, people get up in arms as if someone threatened to take away your only child and then just eat it in front of you. Just because we're all used to games being fun, gamers completely resist the notion of games being anything else. We get up in arms and we say that with the second someone says, like Genova Chen, that games should be more serious, we say, fuck that guy. Fuck him for suggesting that games should be serious. Games should not be any one thing. But if someone came out and did the opposite and said that, you know what, games should just be fun. Fuck serious, pretentious navel-gazing, then can you really imagine a bunch of people jumping out of their seats and shaking their fists in the air the way they do when anybody says, hey, let's actually not be 12-year-olds for 5 seconds and make a game about, love or hate or anything that's not about how awesome it is to strangle somebody with your bare hands. Film is considered a legitimate artistic medium because it has this bedrock of really relevant, really interesting, really artistic films like Casablanca or Citizen Kane, unfortunately, or Breathless or The Seventh Seal, that people can look back and say, this is a use of the medium, not only of the medium's strength of cinematography and all those things that are specific to that medium, but they also tell stories that speak to the human condition and speak to things that actually matter in real life, like life or death or pride or any of these things. And because it has that bedrock, people will still pay to see those kinds of things from movies because they accept that movies are capable of doing that. I mean, yes, in a given year you see 100 bazillion thousand awful comic book adaptations of Michael Bay movies and things like that, but still on a yearly basis, you'll still get like a dozen to 2 dozen really good, or at least, if not really good, really artistic attempts at speaking to the human condition from mainstream companies, not even just indie companies, but mainstream companies as well, because there's still some profit in actually respecting the audience's intelligence for just a short period of time. Games don't have that. Right now, games have no bedrock of artistically relevant stuff, and it's very profitable to be not artistically relevant and to just be silly and to say, isn't it fun to chainsaw things? And it is very fun, don't get me wrong. But just to talk about isn't it fun to chainsaw things, and basically build an entire industry off of that, to the point where if we don't expand right now and the gaming industry doesn't turn into something more than just the fun of violence or the fun of shooting things, then in 50 years it's still going to be just this, because this will have proven itself to be profitable, and nobody will ever need to make anything that actually goes beyond the fun of shooting something, because why bother? There's no buck in it. Well, it'll be left to just indie developers to do that stuff, and indie developers are great and everything like that, but indie people do not define the strengths of a medium. Like comics right now, for instance, a lot of people are worried, well, not a lot of people, but the people who say Citizen Kane of games or whatever, the people who say we need to be more serious, say that comics are essentially a premonition of what could happen to games if we don't get our fucking act together. Because comics, there were a lot of fantastic indie comics, like from Harvey P. Carr and Chris Ware and all those people, Jeffrey Brown, but the mainstream comic publishers, all they do, superhero comics, vigilante comics, comics about chicks with big tits. And so the mainstream world, the society in general, looks at comics and says, okay, I guess there's potential for artistic merit there, but it's right now, this is silly. You're just making a bunch of silly power fantasy aimed at 12-year-olds. And right now, that's where games are. I like superhero comics, and I like really violent games, but it's a shame, no matter what you like, no matter what you think of the actual thing that's being done, it's a shame to see any medium with such expressive potential being squandered on one thing. In a general sense. People, Roger Ebert says that games are an art, and he's wrong, of course, because of the potentials of the medium, but we all rush up and we jump and we say, no, and I'm going to write a really big blog post, it's going to have so many paragraphs and all these different really pretty pictures and different explanations of why you're wrong, but really, if our argument against him saying that games are an art is to make him play BioShock, a game that is primarily about shooting people in the face after setting them on fire and then maybe electrocuting them and then freezing them, what does that say about our medium? That one of our most treasured games is still about killing people in really, really inventive ways. Film doesn't have that problem, books don't have that problem, music doesn't have that problem. Games can be about anything. Games can be about space exploring and eating breakfast and falling in love and shooting someone in the head and taking your daughter to school for the first time and learning about your father dying and slowly aging and grabbing somebody by the head and then ripping it open and then eating their brain and then peeing on it. They can be about anything with all the powers of interactivity and agency and immersion that they have. And right now, they're just primarily about one thing where the mainstream publishers are concerned. And that is terrifying. And that is horrible. And if you think you're being like a real gamer or a hardcore gamer or just not being pretentious by saying that games should only be fun, like because that's what they originally were and that's what they've always been, you don't love games. You might think you do because you think you're being pure to the original idea of what games are and therefore what they're supposed to be, but you actually hate them. You hate the potential of what they could be and all the expressive power that video games have inherently. You're scared of seeing something change from just fun into fun and a whole web of other things that could completely change your understanding of what the world could be through interactivity. You're scared of that, and if you think that games should just be fun, you are a coward.